is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1 half. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're not paying.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
sorry about that. There's internet problems. There's internet problems on the internet, and so we had some trouble. I just want to make it clear, though, before the being pounded with boomer comments, it's not my internet. It's Matt's, and he's a millennial. Mine is rock solid, and I've actually am upgrading my uploads. So
whoa, upgrading your uploads. That sounds pretty boomer.
I mean, I am willing to go head to head on any day about
Sam. I am pre-boomer.
Technology.
I am pre-boomer with technology.
You're the
I am
you're
from
the
a
silent generation.
Yeah, I am exactly. I am like, if I press that, will I set off NORAD?
I remember my grandmother lived till she was 104, and when she was about 100, and this might have been about like 10 years ago, maybe she was in her 90s, and this was 20 years ago, and I was videotaping one of our Passovers, and she was getting up there, and my Uncle Saul, who my son is named after, my great Uncle Saul, was at least 100 at that time, and so she was sort of excited that I was videotaping this, and she kept asking me, like for weeks afterwards, did it come out? And I'm like, that's not the way it works, Grandma. Like I watched it record. It doesn't need to be developed. And just that, it took her months to get over that concept that we didn't, because it used to be, you would take even, 8mm or 16mm film, same thing, just even with an Instamatic camera, you'd take pictures, you take a roll of 36 and 22 would come out. and like 6 were, just flashes of light on the film. And then of course now that's not the case. It always comes out. Great story. Anyways, getting back
Keep
to
going.
politics. All right, so let's just talk about this. So, Michael, you didn't have a chance to hear the David Dayen interview because virtually no one did. But we will post the interview in its entirety. The gist of what Dayen is arguing is that because of the way this is structured, because there is so much money being funneled to corporations, I don't know, let's say about 400 billion in the package itself, but it is essentially going into creating a bank. Handel Billion will represent their capital reserves, and they will loan out 10 times that, 4 trillion, excuse me, not 10 times. Is it 10 times or 100 times? Maybe 10 times, $4 trillion. And all of that money going to these major corporations, what it will do, even if they pay it back, it's going to give them capital at a time where other people don't have capital, and it's going to create even more wealth disparity. It is going to destroy small business because you're going to have a big business that's not going to be suffering at all. It's not going to be dealing with any of the problems. I mean, the analogy I was using was that we are all under a yellow flag now, right? We're in the Indy 500. Somebody's crashed, or there's no 3 crash, and we're all under the yellow flag. And essentially what the government is doing is saying, like, okay, 90% of the country under a yellow flag, 10% of the country, you are now free to keep going around the track at full speed. And
Right.
so when we get to the end of this race, that being this crisis and the coming economic crisis, what's going to happen is we're going to have a tremendous amount of wealth disparity. Those people who were basically given the green flag are going to be lapping us. So to the extent that we had wealth inequality before now, it's going to be that much more. To the extent that we had tremendous amount of concentration within the context of business, it's going to be much more so than it was before.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, the top line is I completely agree. It's grand theft bailout, if you'll forgive me, trying to just brand it in a way that's sort of, maybe kind of simple. I think that's exactly what it is. I think it's really important, and I've been trying to do this myself. I think that there is very serious ideological and policy differences between a more social democratic, nationalized key strategic industries, take a German model with workers on the boards, incentivize worker co-ops, versus a purely kind of anti-monopoly model. So I think there's legitimate differences there. But one thing I want to bring into the mix more in my ideological terrain is that the actual legitimate, not Republican talking point, but real, in reality, small business thing matters. I saw a tweet the other day from some guy who, basically ran a digital platform that helped process payments primarily in the small business sector. This was, I think, last week. He's like, we lost 50% of our business in days. That is the representation of that for people who are creating actual, basic payrolls for themselves and small groups of other people are one of the kind of last outlets that we have of wealth generation in this country that isn't on a complete, basically monopoly capitalist platform. So I think that that's an incredibly big deal. I think that this is also where I'm tired of talking about overturned windows. It's great. There's been real ideological headway. I think we primarily, again, on a political level, we thank Bernie Sanders and then obviously many serious social movements, but also, frankly, just how bad things are is making people's politics change. But we're at the point now where, and this bailout package really shows that it's a question of power. Great. Plenty of people would like a fair, decent, just bailout. Not going to happen because this country is run by a very narrow sector of interests. And the last thing I'll add to it that is very disturbing to me in a dystopian trajectory that we're on is this is also coalescing with, we've never reformed the surveillance state after the Snowden revelations. We have pieces of legislation across the country that are very harsh on protesters and other forms of civic action. I don't know what the state of it is now, but there was a report last week, first in Politico, that Bill Barr wanted to push through new DOJ recommendations allowing judges in times of emergency to hold people without trial. So we need to look at the synergy of these things, and in terms of this massive wealth concentration, and then on the other hand, some real continuing and ongoing steps in limiting outlets for people. Now, again, it's I think it's important to see those in tandem.
Well, and I think we're going to be increasingly talking about this, because if you wanted to write up a scenario where a would-be fascistic autocrat sort of completes the circle, you would write something like this, like, well, how about a global pandemic that will destroy the economy, and on top of which, and Jamie made this point the other day, it makes protests very difficult because people don't want to go out and be in close proximity to each other.
Indeed.
But let's talk about that. That's something. Let's put a pin in that conversation, because I have a feeling it's one we're going to be having much more coming forward. Let's stay here with this stimulus. Now, Dayan had a few choice words for both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in terms of their support of this package. Mm-hmm. Bernie Sanders gave a speech on the Senate floor last night prior to the passage of this bill. It was in response to 4 Republican senators who came out and said that the unemployment expansion was too generous. I am highly skeptical that was the issue. I was very, very, and in the course of talking to Dayan about it, I made this point that I find it hard to believe that Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham, South Carolina, the only Republicans, there was also Rick Scott from Florida and Tom Cotton from Arkansas, who had a problem with this. I found it all very suspicious. My guess is that, in fact, what was really going on is that there is some type of major interest in South Carolina. It may be the same interest in Arkansas and Florida, but maybe it's different ones there, who saw something in the bill that did not favor them in some way. Yeah. And they called up Tim Scott, and they called up Lindsey Graham and said, hey, you guys got to hold this up. We want this provision in there. And they agreed, well, let's just go with the unemployment thing. That will seem outrageous.
I think that's exactly, I agree with you completely.
I have no evidence to that.
No, but I think this is the type of thing that in 6 months, as we're picking through the wreckage, we'll be like, oh, there was this cotton subsidy thing, or that might have hurt a Hyundai plant. I think you're probably right. Now,
Bernie Sanders got on the Senate floor to chastise them about this and mm-hmm. said that he would put a hold on the bill if that part of that provision was taken out. Frankly, and Dayan made the point that Bernie Sanders is part of the Democratic leadership. It's not necessarily he's chairman of outreach, but he's in those meetings. Yeah, he is literally part of the Democratic leadership. And in some respects, what he is doing is he's, providing the muscle for the Democrats there. But I'm not convinced the whole thing wasn't kabuki theater on some level. I'm not going to have the Republicans, pretend they have an issue with this sort of, a ridiculous argument about, this slight expansion of unemployment insurance. That gives the Democrats something to push back on, and then we all come together. Everybody gets to play their role. Nevertheless, this is Sanders on the Senate floor. I agree with everything he's saying here, but and supposedly Sanders' office and Warren's office both had a similar reaction to the fact of we're going to get another bite at this apple. Well, I am skeptical, but
I could. You want to play the clip first, then I'll respond to that. Okay.
And now I find that some of my Republican colleagues are very distressed. They're very upset that somebody who's making 10, 12 bucks an hour might end up with a paycheck for 4 months more than they received last week. Oh my God, the universe is collapsing. Imagine that. Somebody who's making 12 bucks an hour now, like the rest of us, faces an unprecedented economic crisis with the 600 bucks on top of their regular unemployment check, might be making a few bucks more for 4 months. Oh my word, will the universe survive? How absurd and wrong is that? What kind of value system is that? Meanwhile, these very same folks had no problem a couple of years ago voting for $1 trillion in tax breaks for billionaires and large profitable corporations. Not a problem. But when it comes to low-income workers in the midst of a terrible crisis, maybe some of them earning or having more money than they previously made, oh my word, we got to strip that out. Got to tell those poor people that no matter what. And by the way, when the McConnell bill first came up, unbelievably, and I know many Republicans objected to this, they were saying that, well, we want to give whatever it was, $1,000 or $1,200, but poor people should get less. You see, because poor people are down here, they don't deserve, they don't eat, they don't pay rent, they don't go to the doctor, they're somehow inferior because they're poor, we're going to give them less. Well, that was addressed. Now everybody is going to get the $1,200, but some of my Republican friends still have not given up on the need to punish the poor and working people. You haven't raised the minimum wage in 10 years. Minimum wage should be at least 15 bucks an hour. You haven't done that. You've cut program after program after program, and now, horror of horrors, for 4 months, workers might be earning a few bucks more than they otherwise went. Well, needless.
So there it is. Sanders is on the floor chastising these 4 Republicans for claiming. And the issue, of course, was, and Lindsey Graham had laid it out quite nicely. One, they don't know how unemployment insurance works. But Lindsey Graham went up there and said, like, if we give, a nurse $24 an hour, and that's more than she can make as a nurse, she may not work. And Rick Scott was talking about, like, we want to make sure that people want to work. You don't
Can we say, Sam, I'm sorry, before I get to it, but I got to just interject this. Can we ask Rick Scott if embezzling an extraordinary amount of money, which he has been at least credibly charged with, has that disincentivized his work ethic?
I made that point with Rick Scott that he's also incredibly wealthy, and
he's still working. He
right.
built the Medicare system. He's working, so maybe people just want to work.
The point that Dayan made in the context of our discussion is that that's not the way unemployment works. You can't make a decision. If you don't get to collect unemployment because you decide you don't want to work anymore.
Of course.
You need to be fired or laid off.
Of course.
That is confirmed by your employer. I have had people who have been in my employ who end up going on unemployment insurance, and I have had to indicate that, yes, I let them go.
They weren't like,
they were working, or they were working, 6 months ago for me. I mean, they check on this stuff.
Yeah, of course. No, that's ridiculous.
So they have no idea how unemployment works. I mean, I find the whole thing to be a little bit kabuki theater-ish. And I don't know. I mean, look, Sanders could have held up the bill.
So here's what I think.
Warren could have held up the bill.
Yeah.
Sherrod Brown could have held up the bill. Any of them could have held up the bill. But we do have a situation where, the members of the House, they don't want to come back to Washington to hash out a new bill. It's a very difficult situation. I mean, I don't know.
I have a political point, a bill point, and, a bit of a broader point. So, look, I have no problem with criticizing Bernie where it's legitimate. So in an ideal world, let's just be really specific. I would have liked him to vote against the bill, potentially put a hold on the bill, although I think that creates more landmines, which I'll explain in a second. And his campaign is doing an amazing job of using their resources to raise money for really important frontline groups. I would have liked to have seen him use the same lists to get people to bombard Congress and the Senate with phone calls. So valid criticisms. I have no problem making those criticisms. I think that's entirely valid. I will say again, I'm, you know me, I'm very fed up with Warren and Sanders and the role they've played in modern American politics in the last several years are not comparable. And even in the context of this bill, I think Bernie put a little bit more of a mark on it, frankly, than she did. And I also find it a little troubling that some people, not Dane, but there's a broader set of people who have kind of oscillated between, oh, well, Bernie, because he hasn't won, showed that this great mobilization drive didn't work. And now all of a sudden want him to single-handedly generate like a second New Deal from this bill. So I have to push back on some of the politics there. The broader critique is fine. And then the third thing goes back to this.
Let me just see if I understand what you're saying. I mean, to be fair, also, my understanding is that to the extent that there was the oversight of that
which
$400 billion,
totally anemic compared to the unemployment stuff that Bernie did. And I just think,
well,
again,
it was Bennett's
totally
bill. It was Bennett's amendment. I mean, it was Michael Bennett's amendment. I mean, but yes, he championed
look, in the last several days, even with those streams with the squad and those types of things, Bernie is doing more.
Well, okay, Bernie's doing more, right? That's fine.
Well,
but the point is, in terms of Bernie's doing more than Warren. That's not relevant to what my critique is. It is on this bill.
Well, it's relevant to what my critique is, but I'll finish beyond that, which is that because we're bringing them up in the same way. So if we're talking about both of them, I'm going to make the obvious distinctions. The first parts of the critique are fine. And then the third part gets to what I keep hammering that we need to figure out, which is, I talked to somebody in the Bernie orbit about this on more of the policy side. And it's the same point you always hear in these conversations, whether we're talking about harm minimization with voting or whether we're talking about whether or not to vote for an atrocious bailout.
Right.
We care about people. They don't care. There's nothing else that's going to come of this. And if I put a hold on it, that means that literally people are going to start losing their apartments in a matter of days.
Right.
And the big strategic answer to that is America needs a labor movement. That's a very long project. So again, I don't know the answer. I just want to make sure that we're making the proper differentiations if we're going to talk about Sanders and Warren, because they're important, because we need to think clearly.
Fair enough. I mean, and
then to just real quick to button it with, if the critique of Bernie is use your email list to call people and maybe cast a vote against this, I'm down. I happen to hold those positions, but let's not, overstate it because we have a fixation on Bernie. That would be my political point.
I think what this does illustrate, and we can argue. I'm agnostic on the idea of in terms of this bill, whether oversight of that money is more or less relevant than the expansion of than Bernie's speech about the unemployment.
I'm not, but that's fine. We can just table that. Yeah.
But I think what we are seeing, because of that dynamic where they and any other Democratic senators you want to talk about are limited by the dynamic that happens in some respects, is also sort of like the argument that we were talking about at the beginning of the race, which is it may be the case that Bernie's car can go 75 miles an hour and Warren's car can only go 55 miles an hour. But the speed limit is 40 miles an hour.
Well, the speed limit is while you're in opposition is 40 miles an hour. And, this is why you need to actually get power. And I think, what's amazing.
The speed limit, I mean, look, even when you are the president, you still have Chris Coons and,
well, no doubt. But I would like a Bernie Treasury Secretary with a slush fund would disturb me a lot less. And I think that, frankly, I know there's no doubt about it, but we can also go back. I mean, and let's get out of the, we've got I have very strong thoughts about the Sanders Warren debate. I think it matters, but let's go bigger than that. I mean, we know that, look, I think if Hillary Clinton was president, I don't think the bailout would look terribly different, frankly. I think it would be a bit more generous. And I also, the other part too, that continues to really disturb me And I've been going back and reading about Clinton, you know, in the 90s a lot more. Awful, horrible from a policy perspective, but he was a master. I mean, that was triangulation. Oh, that polls well, I'm going to steal it. And then I'm going to whack you back with something that people don't like. You know, okay, I can terrorize poor people with the best of them, but we're going to protect some birds at some national parks. And incidentally, I'm going to be out ahead of this before you. And so I think there's a part of this that really does just disturbs me post-ideologically, because I just don't see an effective opposition, even regardless of me getting all of the policy stuff I want.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a dynamic that needs to be worked out and figured out. I mean, part of it may just be on some level. I mean, I don't know if you're ever, I don't know in what scenario, right? There are Democrats, opposition party, however you want to call it, whether they were a Labor Party or not, could get up and decide, I mean, that the proper course of action in this instance, when you are an opposition party, is to stop the bill going forward.
Well, this is, and again, this goes back to the 2 weeks ago, you know, argument, which actually matters because this is a measure of competence of Pelosi and Schumer sitting down. And honestly, I think even Harry Reid would have done this. Harry Reid's not my favorite guy right now. I think Harry Reid would have had a much better track of what his caucus wanted and didn't want, and might have had the ability to say, and again, I keep trying to make this really narrow, this amount of money for hospitals, this amount of expansion for food stamps, and, you know, this on unemployment and a couple of other things. And if you want to hold this up, dude, okay, but you're already going to get blamed for this catastrophe anyways. And they would have folded in a second. I really believe
Chuck Schumer thought like the big thing they were bragging about in this bill was the money, the slush fund money can't go to, you know, Trump's kids. And that was it. That was like the thing that they were really championing. And,
pathetic.
And you have, you know, Nancy Pelosi out there, like, as if they were completely powerless, trying to sell to everybody that somehow, and look, you know, this is chump stuff. And it's not, here's the bottom line. It's not working.
It's not working.
Donald Trump's approval rating is now the highest it's ever been. Now, it is quite possible that we are, like I keep saying, we're at the beginning of this. And I think the vast majority of Americans around the country are seeing Donald Trump come out every day. He is giving a press conference.
Mm-hmm.
There are, you know, worried looks on everyone's faces. His press conferences, I mean, I would not encourage people to see that because it's just not good for your mental health. But he has, for the most part, been rather subdued. And I wouldn't say he comes off as presidential, but he doesn't come off as the lunatic that he is. He is completely scripted. He's up there. He's like, you know, making sure. I mean, it's almost like, you know, after I've just sat down my daughter and I get like, you know, a half an hour of like, make sure that you look people in the eye when you say hello to them. Make sure you thank your aunt for making dinner tonight. And on some level, that's what he's doing. He's like going up there like, I just want to say our first responders are great. And everybody's doing a great job. And he's not knocking anybody. And he's not even like, he's like, the governors are great. We're getting along very well. People heard it.
But, and I actually think people, look, people do need to know that, right, Sam? Like people need to know that yes, we all know what he is, but people do need to take some time to understand why he's in the mid 50s. And you should watch it. You should watch him be able to pretend that he's a normal human being. You should have a sense.
His approval ratings are in the mid, now 46%.
I meant mid 50s on handling the coronavirus specifically. That's insane.
I think here's the thing. I would imagine his approval ratings much lower in New York.
I would imagine. But that would be true generally. We are at the beginning of this. We are at the beginning of this. Right now, people are staying at home, but they're not seeing their local hospitals overrun with ICU patients. They're not seeing reports of them having to bring a refrigerator truck up to the back of a hospital so that they can store the bodies, like is happening in New York City right now. Yep.
They are not feeling the impact of 3.5 million people losing their jobs last week and possibly, and I think the number is going to be about 6 to 7 million this week. And we'll see that number next week. This has not, the implications of what's going on have not hit the majority of the country. They are maybe staying inside, but that's, I'm staying inside. I'm staying away from people. I'm sheltering myself, and I'm not, and it's
could we agree with
politically,
what you're saying is 100% right. And it's horrifying. And if this ends up finally doing to Trump what it should do politically, it will be thanks to just the raw assertion of how horrible this is and nothing that the Democratic leadership could have done. And the reason I'm hammering this point again in this specific moment is because, independently of all of my objections to these people, I legitimately say, and will keep saying, I think it's somewhat democratically important to have a somewhat functioning opposition party in a two-party system, even one that I would strongly object to in many, instances. And I think it is, and I think people who are more on the side of, I get the feedback of like, you don't understand what's practically possible and this type of thing. And sure, fair enough. But read Waldman and Politico 2 weeks ago. You got to understand that these people are not. Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. Chuck Schumer is the senator from the state that is hardest hit by this, that Donald Trump is effing every single second. And Andrew Cuomo is doing a lot of work for himself, being on media and doing some good things for the state, although he bears responsibility for this too. He's fought his ass off to close down hospitals. Let's not forget that. But there needs to be a coherent alternative message, or I am not convinced that horrifyingly there's a scenario this helps Donald Trump get reelected. And that's absolutely appalling.
No, there's no doubt. The failure of the Democrats to set this up in terms of, politically has been astonishing. I mean, like, you almost need to sit down and make a plan on how to mitigate the impact of this on him politically to do what they're doing. I mean, we have the presumptive front runner, the presumptive nominee, Joe Biden, did a stream from his home. And we know how challenging that is. Presumably, Joe Biden has better bandwidth than Matt does and maybe a slightly better router. He had 2,800 people on his stream. He had 2,800 people. Before we went down today, we had 7,000.
Yep.
And I don't like, and the guy's not going to debate. The reason why Joe Biden should be debating is because that's the only thing that's going to get any attention for him. And if he can't debate, then we have a serious, serious problem. I mean, like, we need to have a leader coming from the Democratic Party now, right? And like I say, we can see the limitations that everyone has in the opposition party as it is. I mean, put this aside from the Democratic primary. There needs to be someone who steps up and can actually sort of like put this in context so that people understand what's going on with Donald Trump's response here.
I think that's the word. And nobody has that capacity. There isn't a single, this is why I keep reaching to people I'm not a fan of. Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, they can go and do a national address and say, here's what he did with the pandemic office. Here's the timeline on the warnings. And here is a path forward to protect your health and economy. And you can make that as moderate and non-bold as you want. You need to do something. But you don't need to outline again. You need to have some leadership
Obama
capacity.
And Clinton, Bill Clinton, let's say. Yeah. I mean, I don't, even if you bring back FDR and have them come in from the sidelines and do it, I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to become like the story is immediately going to spin off it. That's why you use the stimulus as that platform. You use the Democratic primary as that platform. Like, Joe Biden should be going to, because look, Sanders showed in the last primary, in the last debate, that he was not going to go hard at Joe Biden. Yep. He had multiple opportunities to go hard at Joe Biden, both on a policy level, on a personal level, on a gotcha moment level, like, name 9, name 3, name 5, never, whatever it
No
was
kidding.
on those packs. He didn't do it. And what he did do was that gave both those guys a platform to speak about the crisis we were about to enter. Now, if you're only getting 2,800 streams on your webcast, and you are the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party going up against Donald Trump in 7 months, it is your responsibility to figure out, how do I get a platform to get the Democratic message, to get the general election message out there? And not just the general election, but because this isn't going to be, we're not
government,
over.
a government in waiting message, and not.
But we're not
I mean,
over. The stimulus fight is not over. There's going to be a phase 4, and there's going to be a phase 5. I mean,
Well,
no
and
mistake
Biden
about it.
already said, his response to the stimulus was basically like, "Yeah, they got what they could get. Can I get some soup?" And I mean, this is I made up the soup
Cuomo
part.
came out and said he was disappointed.
This is a thing that I really want to just look. Again, I want Bernie to run like hell. I wish Bernie did go after Biden hard. Bernie's still in this fight. And then the second non-ideological point is the Democratic, and there's huge democracy problems with this. And, but in Ryan Grimm's book, funnily enough, he talked about how Democratic insiders were freaked out about Jesse Jackson in 1988. And they were grooming Mario Cuomo to get the nomination instead of Jesse Jackson at the convention. Now, Jesse Jackson, was running an incredibly inspiring campaign, and Mario Cuomo is, Cuomo the lesser, as you call Andrew. But they have to be, somebody has to be sitting down, including people that again, I keep, whatever, it doesn't matter. I mean, people in the Democratic Party, for all of their incompetence and insulation, have to see there is a real limit in Joe Biden's capacity. What is a plan B here? Because
I would be shocked if they're
can't do it.
If people aren't going around, and maybe the first one to be doing it is Andrew Cuomo, trying to figure out how Andrew Cuomo becomes the nominee.
Well, I think
don't
that's
know.
gonna. I would put dollars to donuts on that. I do.
I can't see how that could happen, but who knows?
I think we're in very much who knows territory now, Sam.
Before I was talking today and last night, he's like, 3 weeks ago we were talking about the Super Tuesday. That seems like 5 years ago. Like it's a completely different world.
That's right.
So we'll see. But all right, let's get to this Lindsey Graham clip. This is where Lindsey Graham basically says, he's saying one of two things. He's saying either, I don't know what unemployment is and I'm a horrible person. That's one. Or two, he's saying, this is my kabuki theater and I've got really an issue because Boeing is telling me that they'll put more plants in South Carolina or something like that, or they won't lay off people in South Carolina. They'll do it in Washington State. If I get this something in the bill that is, we're not going to find out about for 6 months from now. But here is Lindsey Graham.
And I'm a horrible person.
Well, and I'm a horrible person.
Yeah.
Right. Lindsey Graham.
You're a nurse, aide, making $15 or $16 an hour. You're on the front lines here. A lot of doctors' offices are going to have to roll back because elective surgery is no longer a source of income for a bunch of doctors. So you're going to have all these well-trained nurses that are going to make $24 an hour on unemployment. You're literally incentivizing taking people out of the workforce at a time when we need critical infrastructure supplied with workers.
Now, let's be clear on what he's saying here, that they're going to get more money, these nurses who he's pegging at $24 an hour, they're going to get by applying for unemployment. He's saying basically that they've been laid off by doctors because I guess I don't quite understand this. I mean, doctors, like maybe in some type of private practice, like in their office, the nurses are working there, but that's not where you would treat people for COVID. But even if what he said made sense, even if nurses were like, I'm in this for the extra $2 an hour, that's why I got to be a nurse. And if I can take unemployment and get $2 an hour more for the next month, it's worth it with this onslaught of depression to stay out of the workforce and to get some of that cash. But the flip side is that he's saying, like, we need to basically say to medical personnel in this country, you don't eat unless you go into those hospitals, which our administration has been unable to provide personal protection equipment for. That, I mean, that's what his argument is.
No, and well, then, I mean, this is their argument for everything. It's obscene. I mean, it's their argument for people working in grocery stores. I mean, frankly, it's you need to, and of course, for frontline responders, like, we're at war, we need you. Oh, have you tried using a home garbage bag to protect your face?
Right.
It's disgusting.
And
it's literally murderous on some level. I honestly, it's sickening. It's sickening.
But again, he
and I'm
Tim
sure
Scott
it's BS.
were two of the guys, and I'm convinced that is a little bit of kabuki theater. They were doing that to get some other type of leverage. We'll find out maybe down the road what it was, what little provision they got that helps one of their constituents. Some big, probably Boeing would be my guess, but who knows?
It could be one of those non-union car manufacturers. It could be an ag sub, ag subsidy,
something like that.
Anything like that. I think you're totally right.
So here is Sean Hannity. And are these two clips, Brendan, are they from the same show? It's sort of all over the place, but they are? Yeah.
Like
okay.
Brendan, the voice of God.
Here is Sean Hannity doing a monologue saying that listen to this. He is both trying to, he's trying to thread a needle here. Let's watch Sean Hannity. This is number 3.
Is currently stalled. Why? Because of a provision that would actually pay workers in many instances more money than they would otherwise make on their jobs if they go on unemployment. In other words, more money unemployed than if they were employed as they currently have been. Now, an idiotic idea. Every reasonable American understands this. We need to help our fellow Americans. How about we just keep them whole? Whatever you've been making, you're out of work through no fault of your own, we'll continue to make sure you make that amount of money, because that amount of money should pay your mortgage, your rent, your car payment, and anything else, your food, your groceries, your pharmacy. This is not good for the American economy. It's not fair to the American taxpayers who are all in. America is willing to help out their fellow Americans, make them whole during this brief period of time. Those that deserve the help deserve help, period. You got Bolshevik Bernie Sanders. He's threatening to stop the whole bill if this language is removed, meaning more delays for those people that have been waiting and waiting and waiting and desperately deserve our help. Let's be clear here. Here's what the Democrats have been blocking. Let's see. They've been blocking a relief bill for American workers so PBS, NPR, the Kennedy Performing Arts Center can get a big payday, and Bolshevik Bernie can get his socialist wish list completed. $1,200 direct. This is important stuff. Direct payments to Americans. $367 billion for small business loans. $500 billion for distressed companies. Another $150 billion for hospitals and healthcare workers. They're all waiting. This could have and should have been passed a week ago.
Well, now the amazing thing is he's got he's confused because he's got the talking point up there of expanded unemployment benefits, but he's against it because some people, not all people, some people will still not be made whole by the extra $600. But what Hannity doesn't understand about unemployment insurance apparently is that these are administered by the states. For the federal government to come in and do a calculation where the states would have to introduce a new algorithm where they are trying to determine at what percentage, how to get people up to, let's say, 100% of what their earnings was, they would have to get sort of an unknown number from the federal government. And in fact,
there's the Bolshevik Bernie part. And, you know, I don't know about the NPR, PBS stuff. I mean, more power to them. But like,
why shouldn't they get that in the same way that corporations are getting money?
100%. If you want to make a clean argument that there should be no funding,
broad-based,
literally, yeah, then make it two separate bills and make a people and workers small business bill and then make a separate bill. But
well, that's what should have happened in the first place.
That's exactly what should have happened.
They should have had this on two track, and that's
what I mean with the leverage. And that's why I tried to make the first proposal in my scenario as modest as possible, frankly, because just say, look, we've got somebody that everybody from Joe Manchin and Bernie is relatively happy with, and we're going to two-track this. But Hannity's an idiot. Also, Hannity said for weeks that this was like the winter flu.
Exactly. He was arguing with Fauci about it.
Yep.
Here is Hannity on with Steve Mnuchin. And again, this is, you know, so much of this is, I think, is just sort of like theater on some level to make it seem like they didn't get everything they wanted either. But in fact, they got everything they wanted. They got everything they wanted, and probably more than they could even ever contemplate. Here is Sean Hannity with Steve Mnuchin.
Get your groceries, get your medicines, whatever you need. Life stays normal for this interim period, again, through no fault of your own. But this idea that you're going to make more money unemployed, that angers my audience. It angers me, too. Why couldn't somebody just have to show a pay stub, and that's the money you're going to get?
Sean, you're right, and it angers me, too. But the problem is, you know, the states have computer systems and unemployment that are 35 years old. And
well, I mean, that's exactly it, is that I'm sure that if they could have like just said, well, you're going to get 99%. So you still have that 1% motivation to get back at work, even though you've been fired and laid off. Right. I mean, it's just absurd. But the fact of the matter is, Sean doesn't understand how unemployment works. And the idea that you'd work out that calculation would be impossible. The idea you need to get money in people's hands right now. And so that $600 is just an easy way. Like, they came up with that compromise. It's going to be, like I say, if you're working at a McDonald's, you get laid off, you may end up making 105 to 107 to 110% of what you normally make.
Wow, what a bonanza.
Anyways.
You know, I can imagine Steve Mnuchin saying a multi-trillion-dollar slush fund with no real oversight for me to personally essentially give away but McDonald's worker might make an extra $15. This is really hard. I might sink the whole thing.
We're going to have to take that back in taxes after the fact.
We're going to have to take that back in taxes after. And also, just like, you know, it's so, I also want to really look, I'm already hearing some kind of, you know, let's also see, like, even that 1,200 number, what do states all of a sudden start doing in terms of property taxes and mortgage taxes? And, you know, I mean, and I don't know. It's theater. It's dual theater, because one, they have to pretend that somehow it's a bipartisan effort, and then two, they need to keep their audience. And as always, it's like, oh yeah, we just stole trillions of dollars of your money, but you should be really pissed at those horrible McDonald's workers who are making $10 more from not working. Ugh.
Keep your eyes on the prize, ladies and gentlemen. It's the poor people.
Right.
Here is Donald Trump, convinced that the reason why people are reacting poorly to him picking out a completely random date for when this is all over, just like not founded in anything. He has some of the world's best epidemiologists standing behind him, and he's literally just making up dates that, like, it would be nice. Everybody gets together for Easter. That's when the pandemic is over.
I told you yesterday, he said Imperial College, the new study called Tremendous Timeline.
Exactly. Here it is. Here is Donald Trump explaining what he suspects is behind this whole response to him picking a random date as to when the pandemic ends.
Mr. President, you tweeted earlier linking the closing of the country to your elections. success in November. Is this Easter timeline based on your political interests?
What do you mean by election success? No.
You tweeted, you said that the media wants the country to remain closed to hurt your odds
No,
of
I
being
think the
reelected.
media, the media would like to see me do poorly in the election. I think
lawmakers and economists on both sides of the aisle have said that reopening the country by Easter is not a good idea. What is that plan based on?
Just so you understand, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
I think there are certain people that would like it not to open so quickly. I think there are certain people that would like it to do financially poorly because they think that would be very good as far as defeating me at the polls. And I don't know if that's so, but I do think it's so that there are people in your profession that would like that to happen. I think it's very clear. I think it's very clear that there are people in your profession that write fake news. You do. She does. There are people in your profession that write fake news. They would love to see me for whatever reason because we've done one hell of a job. Nobody's done the job that we've done. And it's lucky that you have this group here right now for this problem, or you wouldn't even have a country left. Okay, go ahead.
If we didn't have that group, we wouldn't even have a country left. I mean, that was one of those moments where he sort of didn't do so well.
I was going to say, we were talking about the whole table manners earlier.
Right. But and again, I don't think that helps. There's a couple of networks now. I think NBC and CNN have decided we're no longer covering these things because he's just lying about stuff. But the idea, and I think that on some level, that is, I like the idea of deplatforming him. And he's putting out garbage, and he's not helping the situation. They don't need to be the communications that he's putting out is not necessarily helping any of the situation as far as I can tell. And so maybe they don't have to cover it live. They can cover clips of it.
Maybe. I mean, he's the president. I just think it's got to be aggressively counteracted, but also seen, I mean, it's so much BS, but he's still the president. We got to watch this, keep an eye on things, look, not everybody's day to day, obviously, but anyways, yeah. I mean, also it is interesting when he's flanked by Mnuchin and Pence. And to me, there's always like those visual messages. Like there's the Fauci press conferences, there's the Barr Pence Mnuchin press conferences,
Meanwhile, a new story out, I think we mentioned this in Vice, that says that Andrew Cuomo, who said, I'm going to put the prisoners in this state to work for sub-minimum wage, and they're going to be making hand sanitizer. Well, apparently, according to this Vice piece, they're not making hand sanitizer. They are repackaging hand sanitizer. They are taking vast amounts of hand sanitizer that the state bought and putting it in New York State branded bottles. And
that is the most Andrew Cuomo thing I've ever heard in my life.
I mean, maybe what's going on is that they get big vats of it and it needs to be bottled. I'm not sure. I hope to God it's not like small. But here is more relevantly from Democracy Now!, Sean Petty of New York Nurses talking about Andrew Cuomo, his role in creating what will now soon be, if we're not there literally in the past 6 to 8 hours, a shortages of beds in this state for ICU patients and for patients who are coming in with COVID. We do not have the capacity. And again, this is one of the problems with having private, such a privatized healthcare system, is that they're going to work on the barest amount of extra capacity they can because they want to maximize their profit. And there was a story out of Philadelphia when we were down there for Netroots Nation. I think it was last year or the year before. And we heard about a hedge fund coming in, buying a hospital, basically closing it down, going to convert it into condos. The hospital apparently is still open, but they are like charging exorbitant. They're gouging Philadelphia for the ability to use that hospital. Yep. Here is a nurse explaining why Cuomo deserves some blame for the lack of ICU beds.
I would call Governor Cuomo probably the single most important person in terms of the drive to close down hospital beds in this state over the last 20 years. In New York State, we've gone from 73,000 beds to 53,000 beds from the year 2000 to the present time. So specifically because of policies that Governor Cuomo has pursued, we are now 20,000 beds behind where we need to be in terms of trying to scale up our capacity to these unprecedented levels. Governor Cuomo estimates, I think this week, that we need 140,000 hospital beds to have enough capacity to treat patients that need oxygenation and hospitalization during this crisis. So we're starting at 53,000 instead of 73,000 to scale up to this, to scale up to the need that is being estimated. So the way Governor Cuomo did that is he came up with a hospital bed closure commission. It was called the Berger Commission. And he also has had now 2 rounds of Medicaid cuts. The first, they're called the Medicaid redesign teams. The second Medicaid redesign team just made a recommendation for massive Medicaid cuts, including specific cuts to the city hospital system where we work, just in the last 2 weeks. So Governor Cuomo is currently trying to reduce Medicaid spending in the state by almost $2.5 billion during this pandemic. So, and it will absolutely result in a decrease in healthcare capacity and keep the state from getting matching federal dollars for Medicaid spending. So it's unfathomable to somebody like myself, somebody who has worked in a public hospital for 12 years and has seen these cuts, seen the resulting decrease in staffing, seen the resulting decrease in services. We had to fight a couple years ago just to keep our pediatric trauma center open in the Bronx.
So, I mean, I hope this doesn't sound too complicated to people, but it's actually quite sort of shockingly quite simple. When you cut Medicaid, the state is responsible, some percentage of it. When you cut Medicaid, you are cutting, and the demand doesn't really go away, right? I mean, because the consumer model doesn't work here. People get sick. People need health care. It's just the ability to manifest that demand through their ability to pay in these city hospitals where they take Medicaid goes down. Therefore, you close down these hospitals because they're not doing the same amount of business because the state's not paying to provide health services, essentially health insurance, to a segment of the population. And so that's how you lose 20,000 beds over the course of a couple of decades in the state. And it's true. I mean, Cuomo was looking to cut Medicaid just in the past 2 weeks. Things have moved so quickly. I imagine that's probably not on the front burner, but I also imagine that they're still going forward. They're perceiving the end of this. I mean, it's reprehensible. It's reprehensible.
It's totally reprehensible. And people need to connect. When people need to connect those, year in, year out stats that we accept as, this crisis is that on steroids. Tens of thousands of people die every year because they don't have proper health insurance or none at all. And it's an emergency too. And Cuomo, I mean, there's an extraordinary irony in Cuomo becoming the new hope of the sort of pundit class when he personally has a record filled with extraordinary holes in this stuff. I mean, it's incredible, stunning.
There's another thing that's happening that is fascinating. And again, this is sort of tied into the nature of this crisis, right? I mean, I remember when the planes hit the towers on 9/11 and having conversations with people who are like, the people who are running into those buildings, not the people who were there necessarily, certainly some, the people who were there ranged from, people who are working as a janitor, people who are working as, working receptionists and also, traders, making a lot of money on Wall Street. But the people who are running in are all working class. and they're going in to save those wealthy people, and that's where they're ending up dying. And but that happened, and that conversation was one of many conversations in the wake of 9/11 that really didn't have the same necessarily resonance, because that was a very contained, finite moment, that the implications of which, of course, were all, sort of political. And we saw it in terms of wars, and we saw it in terms of new authoritarian measures and lack of privacy, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a very different type of event where it's sort of ongoing, and it is exposing in slow motion. It is bringing out, that comment that Lindsey Graham and Rick Scott in particular said, if you actually make people whole for losing their jobs, it's going to disincentivize them. They're not going to want to go back to work. Basically saying, if you make sure that these peoples aren't in danger of not surviving, not being able to get food, they won't go back to work.
Well, that was the point I made yesterday, right? With even the Friedman column, there is the upfront stuff, we want to price gouge, we want, all of that. And there is absolutely a backdrop that if we do the obvious things in an emergency, people are going to go why is this not what we do? Not because they don't want to work, but because they want to be treated well.
Well, and it's also, I think, making a lot of people realize, I hate to bring everything back to Survivor, but there are moments on that program Survivor where they all go to take the vote at tribal council. And there's always one person who's like, I realized last night at tribal council that I'm the low person on the totem pole here. I thought that I was in a different position in the tribe, as it were. But when I found out that everybody was voting for Jim and I didn't know, I realized I'm the odd man out. I'm the one who is disposable. And in a crisis like this, where you have people doling out, relief funds, as it were, corporations get this, these people get that. You're going to get it. We're going to give a mortgage payment forbearance, but rent, not so much. And, people start to realize, wait a second, I'm the one who's going to get screwed here, and I need to stand up for myself. And so what we have seen across the country, I think in limited areas, and I think we're going to see more of this going forward. Here are some sanitation workers in Pittsburgh, and they're realizing hey, wait a second. We go out and do this. We literally pick up the crap of society every day.
Yep.
And we can't even get the basic protection in our situation. We are essential services when there's a crisis, but we get paid like we're an afterthought. We get protection like we don't matter. And
just
so
the clerks and grocery workers.
Exactly. People working at Costco and bus drivers and fast food workers, all of a sudden they're essential. They're essential, but they've been getting paid like they're completely irrelevant. And they've been getting protected like they're irrelevant. Listen to what this sanitation worker in Pittsburgh was saying. It's very quick. It's from Twitter. But I've seen clips like this of guys working on a job site, working on buildings, on construction sites. This is starting to go around because people are starting to realize, hey, wait a second. Everybody's concerned, but nobody cares about us. We're put on the front lines of this war, but we're not even given any equipment. Here's this guy from the Pittsburgh sanitation worker.
Here's direct things we would like to know, and we want better equipment, protective gear. We have no mask. We want hazard pay. Hazard pay is very important. Why? Because we have high co-payments on any type of bill. We risk our life every time we grab a garbage bag. There can be a needle or something in there.
I mean, they are taking the sort of the complaints and the dangers they've had from their job that have been pre-existing, and they're seeing that when push comes to shove, when it's a crisis, that even when it's a crisis and they're expected to do their jobs, they're not getting the help that they need. And so we have sanitation workers in Pittsburgh. We have poultry workers in
Kathleen,
Purdue
Georgia.
Farms, we mentioned in Georgia, bus drivers in Birmingham, naval shipyard workers in Maine, fast food workers in New York City. Some auto workers are starting to complain. I mean, I think we're going to see this across. I mean, teachers were the teachers unions were the ones who were pushing for New York City to close their schools and maybe, saved countless lives because they were being subjected to stuff. And it shouldn't have been that long, frankly. They should have closed the schools probably earlier.
Oh, absolutely. Huge filling of de Blasio and on that, but 100%. And the reason I'm trying to, one is 100%. And we need to figure out if we have the ability to, how to support folks while they do this, because it's a huge risk. And also Noam Schreiber, someone just sent this to me. Thanks. In the New York Times labor reporter, I think he is now currently, that a union has located a massive supply of N95 masks, 39 million critically needed masks to be delivered to New York, to be delivered next week. And they're going to be distributed in New York and California. And this is basically the Service Employees International Union, United Healthcare Workers, SEIU, UHW has located them. I tweeted out the thread. I'll follow up on it. But again, it's Noam Schreiber. That's a totally credible source. And so it's just a great example of, like, one, people treated like utter garbage even in this moment, and two, look, a labor union is doing it. Right. All right, but let's end on a positive note, shall we? We got to get going, and we'll be back tomorrow. We'll make it. We will make it work. We will. Matt is going to upgrade his internet connection. I am upgrading my internet connection. This will happen. But I want to leave on a happy note. This is from January 30th. This is Wilbur Ross. He is the Commerce Secretary for Donald Trump. He and Larry Kudlow were going out during that time 2 months ago now, saying how this was going to be great. You say that COVID-19 is going to be a problem? Well, Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, says this could actually bring back jobs.
You could seriously see the Chinese economy come to a halt. And given the large percentage of global growth that China commands, does that actually threaten what you're just saying?
Well, first of all, every American's heart has to go out to the victims of the coronavirus. So I don't want to talk about a victory lap over a very unfortunate, very malignant disease. But the fact is, it does give businesses yet another thing to consider when they go through their review of their supply chain. On top of all the other things, because you had SARS, you have the African swine virus there, now you have this. It's another risk factor that people need to take into account. So I think it will help to accelerate the return of jobs to North America, some to U.S., probably some to Mexico as well.
There you go. Well,
so, if they incentivize that could be true, but they won't incentivize it.
Well, and we've got to go through now a depression, essentially, to get there. And of course, what it is, indicative of, at the very least, like, they saw this coming. If January 30th, the job wasn't, hey, let's send out Wilbur and talk about how this is going to be great for the economy. Instead, the job was, hey, let's go to the guy who sits on the National Security Council, or used to, and find out, how seriously should we take this pandemic? Let's ask the people from the CDC that are in China. Oh, we fired all of them. Oh, well, let's look at the NSC handbook and figure out how we prep for a pandemic and what we need to do in terms of the Defense Production Act. Now let's send out Wilbur Ross to talk about how this is going to be great for the economy. I mean, that's how completely bat crap crazy these people are. All right, I got 5 IMs. We're going to read them and then get out of here. Sam, do you expect any of the world's bad actors, us, China, Russia, etc., will take advantage of the pandemic in a way which could result in a hot war? I don't think so. I think what's more likely is you're going to have like corporate interests taking advantage of the pandemic in a way that's going to benefit them. Mike, Michigan redneck. My brother-in-law works at a jail in Michigan. 1 inmate and 1 guard have contracted COVID-19, and the guard is in the ICU. My sister is 7 months pregnant, lifelong asthmatic, and they have brand new mortgage. They can't miss housing payments. And my my brother-in-law is now basically being forced to work in a COVID-infested jail to stay housed. The whole jail is only 9 masks for everyone working there because local hospitals sucked up all the rest. This $1,200 one-time payment is going to get people killed. It's forcing working people to choose between homelessness and contracting COVID. I'm terrified for my family, and I feel powerless to help. My heart goes out to you. I mean, you're absolutely right. You know, what Denmark did is basically paid every employer in the country. We're going to pay 90% of your employees' salaries to pay them. We will pay that if you pay them to stay home. We're going to take a month-long hit, but we're going to quash this. And basically, we see what the problem is right there. It's horrible. Horrible. Feed the poopy. So Sam, I'm a freelance animator. I quit his job in February because I was being underpaid, but now all work is dried up because of this. I'm okay financially for now, but unemployment doesn't help a lot of people. Indeed. Absolutely the case. And they are basing these unemployment numbers on 2018 money that you earned. So if you lost your job in March of 2019, if you lost your job anytime in 2019, they're going to go back to your 2018 salary. I'm sorry, that's for the $1,200. Unemployment may have exhausted at that point too. I don't know if it gets extended. Josh from Chicago. What does Sam and Michael think of Tammy Baldwin as VP? She's always been my number one choice for Bernie. I think if Biden chose her, given her longstanding support for single payer and back to the Kanye years, her foreign policy bona fides, this would be the right message to send the left. It would be a better message than, a lot of the other people I would imagine he's thinking of, frankly. And I don't know that it would appease everyone on the left, but I think it probably would get you as many people as you need on the left to vote, particularly in this context. But we will have more to say about that in the coming days. Folks, check out TMBS, check out Nomiki Kant's show and the Antifada, and obviously Literary Hangover. We had tech problems today. We'll work on it for tomorrow. But appreciate your tuning in. Stay safe. See you tomorrow.
Stay safe.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. Finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know